Hello everybody, my name is Dawn Campbell. I'm your host today for another, I was going to say International Coaching Week, but of course that was the other week, IAPC&M CPD and Business Building webinar. And as usual, it feels like you're a regular, Monique, in the hot seat on this roundtable discussion. We have Monique Davenant from Stateside, who has just applied for an upgrade to her Master Coach accreditation. So good luck with that, Monique. And we're here also for the first time with Anna Stapleton, who is also a Master Coach, an Italian living in the UK. And both of them, incidentally, are co-authors of our How to Win Clients and Keep Them book. So welcome.
Thank you.
So today is the fourth in the series, because the first one was actually just a discussion, which is about active listening. So as usual, we're just going to have a discussion around what it means to active listening, using your skills intuitively, and just really having a bit of a brainstorming session, and then we'll take questions at the end if anybody would like to ask some. So we usually start with definitions. So what's your definition of somebody who's listening actively, Monique, please?
It really is about knowing the client's agenda and paying attention to that agenda as the client is speaking through the session. So focusing on what they're saying, but also what they might not be saying, and listening between the lines, so to speak, knowing when to shift when they shift. And to do that, you have to be very present, which was our topic from last month. Being able to summarize, reiterate, stop and ask some questions about something they just said, and maybe point out and ask if that's a direction they want to go into. Just being building on their ideas and their thoughts, and really staying very focused would be if I had to sum it up, that would be my definition of listening.
I mean, looking at the list from the first one, which was establishing the coaching agreement, right through to accountability towards the end, it's very difficult to pick one capability that is more important than the other, because you come to these calls thinking, right, this is one I'm really passionate about, but actually these roundtable discussions have really opened up the topic and given us food for thought. What about you, Anna? What's your definition of active listening?
Like Monique has said, all the importance of listening to the client's agenda. Who is important is the client, what is really going on for him or for her, and it's really being aware of what is going on in your head and not wanting to be right or proving a point. So clearly is being aware of your own thinking and judgments. So because that really is maintaining that distance. But really I deal with a lot of mental, emotional elements. So one of the things is to hear the unsaid, when we say about what has been said or not said, and really going into the small things, the things that perhaps the client is reluctant to say or to admit. So being very attentive, being really present, and listening for something, listening for what is in the background.
Yeah, I remember meeting somebody who, when I was a trainer for a cancer charity, I used to train their volunteers on a 2-day active listening course. We had 2 whole days dedicated to active listening. And actually in that, it encompassed a lot of things like silence, powerful open questions, intuition, and so on. But it's really surprising how the listening is probably one of the big things to what is not said, picking up on the clues or the red flags. And this person who was a doctor said to me that what they called it in the medical profession was hand on handle syndrome. So just as the client had their hand on the handle to leave, and the doctor would look and say, is there anything else? And they go, well, yes, actually there is. It's because they had spent their 10-minute session sort of building trust, which was, I think, the second in our CPD series, that all-important trust before you actually tell the practitioner what is the real issue. And of course, coaches are trained to listen intuitively to the flags, to the clues, what is not being said, read between lines, call it what you will, so that actually you can get to what the real issue is as quickly as possible without being nosy or intrusive. So, you know, what else would you add to that?
To really add to that, Dawn, to your point, sometimes clients come to a call and they have a lot to say and they have a long story, but the coaching sessions are limited to 30, 40 minutes. So the coach has to be very good at what I call bluff bottom line up front, really summing it up, helping the client sum it up and get to the bottom line so that you aren't focusing too much on the whole backstory and too much background and too much context. You've got your bottom line right there up front, what they are truly needing to be coached on that day. And then you can go from there and get into the true coaching. So just to add that to what you just said.
A really laser focused coaching. Anna?
Something that I have experimented with and really tried about the listening, and because I do work with people with the with the emotional element, I tried the experiment of listen or hearing people, and sometimes when they are not able to express or to verbalize what the issue is, I just say to them, okay, to just spend a few minutes in telling me what is going on in your head, what's actually worrying you. And I said, I won't be using this particular section for any coaching, or I won't be making any comments. I just want to hear you say, if naturally they agree with that, because clearly they might say more than they want to say. And that's been a very interesting kind of aspect, because what has happened is that they've been able to verbalize something without worrying about any repercussion or any, and they've been able to speak authentically. By doing that, they've been able to really what I call get rid of their clutter and been able to verbalize the issue they're dealing with much more clearly. So I call it the being heard. And that's something which I've been using for my, on the coaching, because especially once you get to know someone and you have various sessions, but that is one of the things that I have found, useful. And I just wanted to, this is a way of sharing that has really worked. So being heard.
The being heard is a really crucial part of coaching. And for some clients, it's the first time they feel they've been heard. They've suddenly got 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour, whatever the length of the session is, totally dedicated to them. And it can bring up a lot of emotions that suddenly they're going to be talking about themselves and the coach is going to be listening. So what experience do you have of that, Monica, and sort of how it's impacted some of your clients being heard potentially for the first time?
I think that type of clearing is really important for them. And sometimes it's a way for them to, maybe vent is not the right word, but they just need to get it out. And if they come to the call very confused, their thoughts are cluttered, to just be able to speak and being given that space to speak, to vent, to just clear everything out. Sometimes after that happens, I see clients just take a deep breath, like, that just felt so good. Yes. And sometimes once they do that, then they are able to focus better within the session. And if they come with 2 or 3 different topics and they suddenly are venting and clearing, suddenly they've already narrowed it down for themselves that this is the one topic they need to speak about today after they've done all of that clearing. So it is really important for the coach to be there for that and to sometimes just not respond, just let them go and see what comes out of that. And the coach has to be listening for that. Sometimes during that process, The client might have trouble finding the right word for something, or they might say, I have all this to say, but I don't know the one right word. And the coach might be there to help them find that one word that would help them actually articulate better what they are hearing and what they are saying. So that's a really, really important part of a coaching session.
Yeah. But do that without interrupting, because I know different cultures have a tendency to chip in. So the British, I think, tend to try and finish your sentences and help you if you're struggling with the word. In France, for instance, they just wouldn't. They would just be blank until you'd finish. So I might be struggling with a word in French, but they won't help me. Whereas in England, if I'm struggling for a word, they say, oh, you mean such and such? No, no, I don't mean that. It's such and such. No, 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 I don't mean that. So you want to avoid that sort of miscommunication and assumption and jumping in. But if the client says, yeah, I can't think of what I mean, you know, by all means, then have a little bit of a brainstorming as to what this word could be that's most appropriate for whatever they're feeling. But just be aware of some cultural differences there.
I would agree. I think in the United States, I have heard some of my foreign clients say, oh, the Americans, they just never shut up. They just want to keep talking. They won't let someone get a word in edgewise. So it is really important for a coach or really anyone who's coaching anyone, whether it's an executive or in any country, any culture, to really learn truly good listening skills so that you're not doing that interrupting. You're really letting the client say what they need to say unless they ask you for that kind of help. I think it's really important.
Very much so.
Yes, go on. Sorry, Anna.
No, it's very, very important, this idea of just letting them to go through the process. And sometimes it's just they need a little bit of time. So it's really where now the silence or the giving them the space. So I usually say, talk for 5 minutes, I won't say a word. So almost being very precise. And that really works. So they know that they won't be interrupted.
Now, I know that's hard for you because you're an Italian. Italians are all about the hand talking as well as the talking. And I know what you're saying, Monique, about some people would just say, well, the Americans, will you just shut up? But what I hear from an assessment point of view is that particularly with new practitioners, they're terrified of silence. So they ask a question, you have the briefest pause, and they think, oh my God, the client hasn't understood. So they ask the same question in another way, when really all the client needs is some time to process the question, think about their answer, particularly if you're coaching clients in different languages. They even need to translate what you've just said. So it's the fear of silence. So what sort of examples have you got? Annie, you go first. What sort of examples have you got around, you know, as being an Italian, having to sit on your hands and shut up and let your client talk? Yeah,
literally, I just train myself. I think the British or the English people have trained me very well in really the silence. And I think is practice. It is really practice. And again, being aware of what has been said and really, you know, knowing the client, thinking they do need the space. So literally I count up to 10 seconds or 15 seconds and just train myself to just, is their time. And the silence is very much part of allowing them to go through their thought process and at the same time encourage them. Almost you force them into say something because they know if you know they're going to interrupt, you're going to intervene, the guy will say, oh, they're going to say something anyway. So by keeping the silence, encourages them to say more than perhaps they would otherwise say.
That's a really good tip, Anna, to count in your head, you know, 1, 2, 3, for maybe 10 seconds or so, because they will tell you if they don't understand the question. You might even see it on their face that they're really not sure what it is that you've just said, or they'll actually say it. So have the courage of your convictions. And this is where the confidence comes in. And that comes with practice. have the confidence to be quiet and let the client think. What sort of tip do you have for that, Monique?
Many of my clients, English is not their first language, and our coaching is in English. So you had mentioned, Dawn, that sometimes people are processing, and that's true also if English isn't their first language. They're processing, and in their mind, they're translating in their mind so that they can respond in English. And that takes a little bit of time. There's a lag time for them to respond. So as a coach, I need to be aware of that. I need to remember that. I need to be aware of that in the moment when it's happening so that I understand why there could be a pause. Another example that I have for myself personally when I was being coached, it's kind of the opposite. The coach was allowing almost too much pausing. And we were on the phone. It was not video, so I couldn't see his face or any body language. And sometimes I would say something and there would be such a long pause that I wondered if he was still there. Or I wondered if he was multitasking or not listening, because the pause was way longer than what I felt was comfortable, what I was comfortable with. And a few times I had to say to him, "Are you still there? Did I lose you off the phone? Did the call drop?" Because I couldn't tell. So there has to also be that balance there between the pausing and what is an appropriate length of pause and what isn't. And it's the dynamic between the two people, the coach and the person being coached. It's the only way that you know, you have to listen for that appropriateness also.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting that your client was making the long pauses and making you uncomfortable and unsure and unaware because you didn't have any other clues. So what would we do then, ladies? You know, we've got a client who needs a lot of time to think. Maybe that English isn't their first language. They need to translate and process what you've said before they can even think about their answer. And the pauses are quite long. What would you do to just let them know, particularly if you can't see them, that you're still there? What would be some of the things that you do?
Well, I sometimes say to them, if I ask some kind of a question or make a statement, I'll say, "I'm going to be silent for a moment until you can think about that, or until you can process that." Or I'll say, "Take your time reflecting on that, and I'll be silent for a moment." Or sometimes they will actually say to me, "Let me think about that for a minute." Or they'll say, "I'm still thinking." Sometimes when English is not their first language, they will right away tell me. It takes me some time to process and translate in my mind, so there might be a pause before I can respond to you. So I think that's really important too, is to just be transparent about that so that you and the client will understand the reason for the pausing.
Yeah. And what about you, Anna?
I agree entirely. And, you know, I think we know that listening is really an active phenomenon, and you actually can hear it. And as the conversation develops, even if, you don't really see the person, you can tell. And of course say, "Yes, I will be silent for a few moments and giving you time and let me know." So it is really important. You get the sense of it, but being, dancing with it, really just reacting and asking or checking, "Are you all right? You still need a little bit more time?" So it's just being active and being present to what is really going on.
Yeah. I mean, some people think that listening is quite passive, but it really isn't.
No.
And, when you've got somebody who's upset, for instance, and can't talk because they're a bit choked, then there could be a long silence as well. So I would just be making some sort of, I'm still here, just take your time. And I think you're absolutely right. Just let them, because it is their agenda after all, isn't it? It's their pace, it's their time. and if they need to spend most of it quite quiet, and I'm sure there have been practitioners who have had a client who hasn't actually said a great deal in the first couple of sessions because it's very emotional. It's hard to get the words out. So actually being able to be quiet and hold that safe space for them is your job as a coach. That's what the client needs. And just to let them know that you're there, and when they're able to talk, that's fine. We have to remember, what's the saying? It's like 60% with the ears and 40% with the mouth in order to have a balanced conversation with the client. Is that right, Monique?
Yes, yes, exactly right. And I also think the other piece of it is for the coach to be listening well enough to be able to seek clarity. If the client says something that might not make sense to the coach, or maybe the coach didn't hear them correctly or hears it a different way, it's very important for the coach in that moment to realize that they need clarity and to ask or to reiterate, is this what I understand that you're saying, or did you mean this, or did you mean this? And instead of letting the client go on and the coach is still sitting there confused about what was said. So it's part of listening also is to make sure you're clear, and if you're not, to interrupt in the moment, interrupt the flow in that moment, ask for clarity.
Yeah.
I mean, that is so true. In fact, one of the, in my view, one of the most important aspects is really creating intention for the, for the coaching, of course, the coaching session. And depending on who the people are, whether it's someone I know quite well, I always say to them, what do you want me to listen for? Or I will listen for something. We agree that what is important to them. So, and if then they start sharing and that goes off track, then I bring them back. So being able to maintain the focus on what do they want to they want to cover, and of course interrupt if they go off or bring them back. But if there is an intention, or if there is something, one of my clients, for instance, I've been working with them the last few weeks, have been quite interesting. I just say, I'm going to listen for your greatness. So anything that you say, and if you go off, I will interrupt or listen to you, or just really being focused and interrupt if necessary.
Mm. Yes, and Marion on the ICW call, who wrote the book Laser Focus Coaching, which has just been launched on Amazon as an audio book, said last week that when we need to interrupt, just do it by using the name and reflecting back what the topic is. And that's one way of, getting back on track with the client who is talking a lot. Let's just suppose we have intuitively picked up some clues, some flags, call them what you will. What would be the way that you would deal with them, Monique?
I usually am very transparent about what I am sensing, and I ask the question. I don't assume that this is what I'm sensing, but I ask by saying, this is what you just said, and did you mean this, or did you mean this? I get a feel that, and is this correct? Am I on the same page with you as far as this goes? And then I let the client confirm or not, or redirect and say, well, no, this is what I meant, or this is how I said it. And that also stands true with a client's tone of voice, because we also have to be very intentional about listening for the tone. And sometimes the client might be verbally saying one thing, but the coach might sense a tone that is saying something different. So when that's the case, I think it's important for the coach to bring that up and point that out. For example, if a client is saying, everything's fine, I feel great today, everything's fine, but you notice in their tone that doesn't seem to be the case. I think it's important for the coach to bring that up and point that out, just to get clarification. And sometimes when I have done that, the client then has said, well, okay, you're right. There was something underneath all of this that I didn't bring up. And then that takes us in that direction. So yeah, another very important piece of active listening.
I think what you've just said there is really important about the words and the pitch and the pace and the tonality. And that's one of the reasons when I'm on a call with a new client, I will say, how are you today? I don't say, how are you? Because I want a snapshot of how they are today. And that horrible word, oh, I'm fine. Well, only fine. There's so much weight behind the word fine. I watched a great TED talk saying it was one of the worst words that you could use to describe yourself because it meant you were anything but happy. So that's one way of measuring, intuitively their energy and so on. But when it comes to clues and flags, what I tend to do is just note them down. It really depends on how long we've got left in the session, how far we're into the session we are. So I might say to my clients, if they're a kinesthetic client, I might say something along the lines, I'm sensing that there's another issue behind whatever the topic was. How accurate is that? And if they say yes, and I'll say, well, we're 10 minutes into the session, so which would serve you best to deal with what's just come up now, or continue with the original topic, and we'll discuss the other one later. But if we're only got 10 minutes to go, I might just let them know that I've heard that there's something deeper, and say, I'm sensing there's something else. How accurate is that? And they say yes. So perhaps we can explore that in a future session. I obviously don't say the next session because it's entirely up to them to choose when. But for me, I usually end up with a little flag sheet. And eventually, when you're working with somebody on a regular basis, they might even come to a session and say, do you know what? I'm feeling really good and I haven't got something pressing. I'll say, well, do you remember a couple of sessions ago, there were a couple of clues or flags that came up and you said you'd love to discuss those. I'll remind them what they are and say which one would be most appropriate today. And they'll say, do you know what? I hadn't thought about it, but you've just put your finger on the nail or whatever, nail on the head. And yeah, that's what we'll go for. So listening to the clues actually helps your long-term relationship, particularly if you don't want to the client doesn't want to deal with something there and then and wants to take some time. Or it's about priorities as well, isn't it? What are your thoughts?
I love that.
Sorry, Monique.
Yeah, I love that, Dawn. The keeping kind of track of things that come up that you may have to carry over, kind of like a parking lot of issues that you might want to bring up at the next session. And I do think that is important too, as you mentioned, for the coach, not just for the coach to keep track, but to let the client know that we're tracking this or just making a note of it to possibly bring up in a future session. And I find that clients really appreciate that. They appreciate the fact that someone is helping to keep track of things, because all of our clients are so busy, and some of these issues can be pretty emotional and take up a lot of their emotional space, which they might not have time for. So for them to know that their coach is helping them keep track of these issues that we can talk about in another session, I think that they really appreciate that. And my clients have said that to me specifically. Thank you so much for doing that, because I don't have time to do that.
It also helps us as coaches if we ever get mind blank. None of us are perfect. We get a blank mind or whatever, then suddenly we've got something else like our clue sheet, that we can focus on and keep the conversation going. Anna?
Yes, it is especially for people for clients you have known, and you know what their characteristics are, and you can actually be reminded. They forget, and clearly we are able to see a pattern forming. So they've been able to say, but is this something which came up before, or there is a recurring kind of perhaps way of thinking, or a view or an opinion, and they say, oh yes, I do that. So it's a way of remembering and highlighting something that they might have forgotten, but they're just going onto the same tunnel again. And that just brings them back and think, oh yes, I keep doing that. And that gives them again the clarity and shapes the coaching session as well.
Mm. So exploring silence, then, we've said that it's definitely not a passive role. And in order to have a balanced conversation as a practitioner, we're the one doing most of the listening to enable the client to do most of the talking. We've also said it involves using your intuition, listening out for energy, for clues, non-verbal communication. What, if anything, and we'll talk about silence, which is a big part of listening. We'll talk about silence in a moment. But before we do that, any other elements of listening skills that we haven't covered?
Well, we may have mentioned it in the beginning. I don't know if we expanded too much on it, but building on a client's ideas or thoughts, helping them expand what they've started with. And that's a fine line because it's the client's agenda. So the coach doesn't want to take over, yet the client might ask for assistance or might come to the call with maybe some very raw idea of where they are going in a direction of a topic, but they need some I guess, facilitation in how to expand their ideas. And I work with executives, so I have a lot of executives that come to a call and maybe they have been tasked by their manager to develop something, a topic or an idea or something for a presentation. And that's why they want to use this session, is because they're trying to bounce some ideas around. And they've gotten a start in their mind, but they want to kind of bounce some things off the coach. They want to brainstorm a little bit so that they can expand some of their ideas. So that's what I consider a part of listening also, is to understand when that's what the client needs and asks for, and then to be able to offer up certain statements or phrases or thoughts or ideas based on the client's request. So if a client were to come to a call and request something like that and the coach isn't really listening or paying attention, the coach may not be a good partner in that session to help the client accomplish what they need.
I think that's particularly important when you're doing group coaching, because as the coach, you need to be listening to everybody and have the facilitation skills to bring somebody in who's quiet so that they can build on the idea and be heard. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Anna?
I mean, my clients are mainly individuals. There are people who perhaps the quality of life, they want to improve their quality of life, or could be, a change in career or making some change. And what I really listen, what I ask them is what really matters to you. And then they explain what matters to them and then say, but what else? Or why is that important? So by just listening to expressing what matters to them, at the end they say, oh yes, this is what I want to achieve. So they are able to clarify their thinking and being able to establish what action to take. So I see my role as just, again, listening to really what matters to them so they can process it and then come up with the next action or what they would really like to accomplish. So just asking, yes, that's part of the asking the questions, but really listening to their reply, to listen to what they communicate.
And talking about asking, and I suppose this comes up in the establishing the coaching agreement and building trust and relationship. But over nearly 20 years coaching, I've had a couple of clients who have had stutters. And I know when I've mentored new practitioners, they found this quite uncomfortable. So I would simply say to my client at the early stages, if you're struggling, let me know in some way, and I will help you find the right word. Otherwise, I'm just going to, be quiet and let you sort it out for yourself. And so getting permission from your client you know, if I can't get the right word out, or yes, if I'm saying a word and really stuttering over a particular word, you can finish it off or just say what it is. But don't be embarrassed if your client's got a stutter, to actually help them and get permission as to how they would like to deal with it. Some clients will say, no, I'm fine. And you just wait very patiently for as long as it takes and listen. And once that trust has started to build up, they get a little bit more confident, and perhaps towards the end of a session realize they haven't stuttered as much as they were worried that they were going to. So again, it's all part of that listening to what your client's needs are. Okay, so let's talk about silence. What do we think of silence? We've touched on it so far today, but of course there are so many different types of silence: uncomfortable silence, angry silence, upset silence, etc. What do you think, Monique? You're smiling.
Yes, because something comes to mind that kind of makes me smile a little bit. I have had an experience a couple of times with clients that actually speak way too much. Like, the session is theirs to speak, but sometimes they're speaking completely off the topic that they wanted to talk about. They aren't focused. And if a coach is too silent and does not say anything, nothing would be accomplished in the session.
Yeah.
So it's really important for the coach to actually listen for times when the client is going off topic and going off focus, and then be able to bring the client back around to what the topic is, to what the focus is. So I think in that way, in some ways, silence can be a negative thing if the coach is using it to allow the client to just ramble and not keep the client focused.
Yeah. And that's where listening to what the real topic is and being a good facilitator and able to interrupt and bring them back on track, it's the only way they're going to get value for money, as you say. Otherwise, they would spend the whole session saying whatever it is that they wanted to say until they actually got round to it. Yeah. Anna, what's your experience of that?
Very much so, because ultimately there is trust. So there is that sense of trust, and it is paramount to be able to interrupt, because clearly if someone is going off, or they are avoiding something. One of the questions I ask, or has happened, people say they describe something. I said, are you avoiding something? Or can I ask, or do I have your permission? What is really going on? So being able to try to bring them back. So interrupting or intervening is really is part of it. And perhaps the client will also expect it, because there is that trust. And so yes, it's that balance in giving enough time, but not enough, that becomes detriment or becomes a counterproductive, for the session.
And that's you listening to your intuition that the client is avoiding the real issue, which is why they're going around the houses. So it's up to us as coaches to ask the right question to help move them forward.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, clearly this becomes part of the relationship with the client, the trust. And I just really say, just stop it. What is really going on? So being able to do it in a way that makes the person at ease. And it's actually quite interesting how they start opening up once they're thinking, oh yes, I'm avoiding, so I'm resisting. So it's really, I think it's part of the listening, to listen to what is going on, and interrupting and asking the questions that make the client thinking, okay, I better say what there is to say, rather than going around the houses. So, but that is important to establish a relationship of trust and respect, because clearly being interrupted or it is, the relationship is really key, and that respect, and also being able to say, I'm listening for something, that you perhaps are not saying, but there is fundamental sense of respect and honoring who the person is, and the client will know. So any interruption or intervention, I like to think that will be taken with, with that sentiment in.
And of course, in the 21st century, where we're quite time starved, and that's your specialist subject, Monique, you know, I think about corporates, you know, passing each other in the corridor. How are you? Yeah, great. And on they go. They're not really, that's not listening. They're not really interesting. They're just making small talk. So how would you help somebody, say you had a junior coach practitioner to mentor, how would you help them develop their listening skills, Monique?
The fundamental place that I start, there's such a difference between listening and active listening, as we've already talked about here. And many people who are new to coaching think that listening means just being silent while somebody just talks. And it's important to make that distinction between listening and active listening. Active listening is when you are an engaged listener and you're paraphrasing, you're summarizing, you're listening between the lines, everything that we've just been talking about on this call. And many times new practitioners, executives who are coaching their direct reports, they think they just need to sit there and be silent while someone talks at them. So the first place to start is to make that distinction between listening and active listening. And then the active listening skills, as we've already talked about, are all these things related to being focused, being present, helping the client to express themselves if that's what they want. It can be exhausting when you're active listening, but listening where you're just being silent is not exhausting because you're not actually doing anything. So it's important to really, really make that distinction and then to move forward on the actual skills of coaching. So with my executives who have told me that they need to learn how to be better active listeners, I have them start practicing. I mean, they've got a great place to practice in the corporate workplace and even at home, is that we take one skill at a time that is under that umbrella of active listening, and they start practicing it. And I ask them to come back to the session with feedback from people, whether it's at home or in the workplace. And they are amazed at the feedback that they get when they truly are when they move from listening to active listening. It's quite an amazing shift for them. And when they get that feedback from people, then we know we're on the right track.
That's a really good point. If you've got any particular area that you're trying to improve on, ask for feedback. And listening is no different. How are my listening skills? People will tell you if they feel valued and listened to or not. And you made me smile when you were talking about that, Monique, because I was thinking, usually, to my shame, when I'm talking to my mum on Skype, I'm typing, so I am not actively listening. But if she said, "What did I just say?" I can tell her what she just said because I heard her, but I wasn't necessarily listening because I'm multitasking. And so sometimes I say to her, no, I'm just concentrating on you, Mum, honestly. But she said, "I could hear the keys tapping away, Dawn. I know you're not listening to me." And we do that with our parents, don't we? We see it on the adverts on television. You know, we do this all the time. But when you're listening, it is a very, very active role. And particularly in a role like hosting a group coaching session, you will go away and you will be exhausted. And all you've had to do really is sit and listen and field and bring in and all those things that we've been talking about. But it is a very deep well of energy that you need to be so present to all these people that you're supporting.
It truly is. It truly is. And it's one of the most important ways to build rapport with people. When I have my executive clients say to me, "I need to be coached on how to, be more influential, on how to build rapport. How do I do that? What's the key? How do I?" listening is the key. We usually start those kind of conversations talking about the skill of listening, and I ask them, how good of a listener are you? And some of them can right away say to me, yeah, I've been told I'm not a very good listener. And as soon as they start practicing these skills of active listening, they are amazed at how quickly they can build relationships, how they can build rapport. Because when you listen to someone, you're telling that person, you're important to me, I value what you're saying, I hear you, and we all want to be valued. And if that can be done with us, with the skill of listening, that's the easiest place to start. If you want to be more influential in the workplace, if you want to be more persuasive, like if you're in sales and you're trying to be more persuasive, listen to the client, listen to what your client's needs are, and that client will hire you in a minute because they're going to feel very important to you.
Yes, I think it really is really very, very important. One of the is helping them to even identify how they're listening to themselves. One of the there are people, let's say, talking about someone, how can I listen to people, or they might have an opinion about themselves, how they listen. And if they become aware of that, then they can really develop and be in control of that and really practice. I mean, as you say, just asking people around, say, if you had to rate me from 0 to 10, how much do you think I listen to you? And they're thinking, I could really be a 2. So what would you expect me to do, or what would you want me to do to be at 5 or 6? So getting feedback, but also as a coach, I think that's one of the practices I do with my clients, is really whenever they feel that they can't do something or they have not been as powerful as they know themselves to be, I just really say to them, what is the listening you have for yourself in this area? And by doing that, they are able to discover that perhaps they are covering something up that they don't want to admit. But once they become aware of it, then they automatically communicate, or perhaps they will listen in a different way. So it's important for the client to realize what is going on with them in dealing with a particular issue that they might have. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it's really encouraging the client to identify the listening they have for themselves in that particular area.
Anna, I love that point. You are so right. And it's a good exercise for all of us. How many times do we not listen to our own self-talk, which could be not so good, our negative self-talk, our things that are going on within ourselves. So that is such a good point, and I'm so glad you weaved that into this topic of listening, because it is really important for us, for our clients, to listen to themselves, to what's happening inside, to what we're saying to ourselves. That is just a really, really powerful point that you made.
And in fact, I'm actually very excited about something that's really happened at the beginning of this week, specifically on this point. And if I may, Dawn, just share this particular example, because I think it's so, so important. I have a client that I've worked with her for a long time. She's a criminal lawyer. She's a very clever person. And on and off, we've been working together for several years. And she contacted me recently, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and she said, there is something I'm dealing with. I don't really know how to deal with it. And basically, she is interested in human rights, and she wanted to produce and publish a paper, and she wanted to enroll her colleagues in supporting her. And she said, I haven't been able to communicate with them what we could really do, and I don't know what is going on. And so we had a session, and I started listening to what she was saying, and it was really clear that she had a listening for herself, that she wouldn't be able to enroll the colleagues in doing this paper with her. And I thought, just tell me a little bit more about this? And of course, there were things that have come up. And one of what was interesting, actually, I said, I know that she wants to be a judge. That's how the conversation went. And I said, what would being a judge would require? And one of the things they talked about was having integrity. So I said to her, what is integrity? Where is the integrity missing in your life? And she went through various things, and we went through a process. And she suddenly realized that, at some level, I'm not really honoring myself. And I think I'm compromising, making compromises because I want to be accepted and liked. Now, I'm not sure what happened, but in that moment, something lit up for her. And she said, oh my gosh, this is what I've been doing, is wanting to be liked by my colleagues, but not really expressing what matters to me, what we can accomplish. And she took on, literally something shifted, and she took on to communicate with them in a powerful, passionate way. And she just took it on, and literally she just altered because she realized she had this opinion of herself, which was really so disempowering. And that is, I think, what part of the listening is for us to be able to elicit whatever is going on. And it was really magical. When I spoke to her at the beginning of the week, she was just a different person because she saw something for herself. And I know that was the way I was listening to her. And, she realized that she was not listening to herself in a very powerful way. It was just magical. I'm very excited.
That's the beauty of coaching, giving somebody some space and some time to make that shift and be heard. Just to build on what you were saying, Anna, about listening to our own dialogue. Of course, it's not always dialogue. As a holistic practitioner, I know a lot of listening to our body comes in signals. It could be a headache, it could be a stomach ache, it could be getting a cold. Your body is trying to tell you something. And too often, particularly corporate people, they don't listen to their bodies. They override whatever is going on until the body actually does something stronger, like maybe break their leg or give them some virus or something that actually pulls them up short and says, right, now listen to me. You need to take some time off. You need to slow down. You need to prioritize, refocus, whatever. So it doesn't always have to be words. It could be what the client is sensing. So asking them, how is this showing up in your body, as well as what are you hearing, is very useful for them to help them get in touch with what's going on internally.
Yeah.
That is so true, Dawn. Yeah. That is, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, you've made a really good point there. I would have to say probably 95% of all the executives that I work with have some kind of body pain, body issue that they have not acknowledged. Mm-hmm. And through coaching, they have suddenly started to realize that. And symptoms of burnout take a form in the body of physical reactions. So that is another good point about listening to the body. And some people have gotten so out of touch with their bodies because of the life they're leading, the lifestyle, the corporate lifestyle, that I do see coaching as a really, really important tool in helping these people get back in touch with their body. So thank you for bringing that up, Dawn.
No, you're welcome. So if somebody wants to improve their listening skills, one of the first things is, if they come to you with a topic like, nobody ever listens to me, or particularly if somebody wants to go for promotion, they say, look, nobody in the meeting takes any notice of me. Well, we've got to be able to turn it around and say, well, if you want to be heard, how are your listening skills? So that's something else that you can talk about the clients with, isn't it?
Yes, most definitely is encouraging them to be the listener, mm-hmm. and practice it and to ask for feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So, well, anything else? I'm looking at my sheet. I think we've covered everything I had written down. Is there anything at all left, Monique or Anna, that you wanted to raise? And at this time, if anybody's got any questions, please just drop them into the chat box while you've got Anna and Monique's dedicated time and listening ear. Then it can answer your questions. I see a question pad around what's CPD. It's continuous professional development. And if you want to talk to me, use the contact form on the website, and I'll talk you through the payment options for becoming accredited. So look forward to speaking to you on that later, Pad. So any questions coming in? If not, we will wrap up and say, just what other top tip would you leave a practitioner coach with who's building their confidence and knows intuitively that this is one of their weak links in their coaching protocol? What would they have to do to improve their listening skills?
Well, go ahead, Anna, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's critical to understand the difference between listening and active listening. And then I would always advise they work with a coach to help them in that way. But there are a lot of resources available related to active listening. So if somebody is not working with a coach and for some reason cannot access resources, and all you have to do is Google active listening, and there will be a list of the skills and other resources to help you learn how to do that.
For me, is again practice and asking perhaps friends or colleagues to give feedback, and having it comes with practice, because by practicing, having the feedback, you can just really learn the impact, or learn how to do it.
Mm-hmm. Tuan's asked a brilliant question. Is there a particular body language which should accompany active listening? Monique.
Well, I think if you're face-to-face with someone, eye contact to me is probably the most important thing. If somebody's looking around or down or not at you, or looking at their phone while you're talking, to me that signals they're not listening. So if you're face-to-face with somebody, now many times our interaction is by phone, so then you can't see body language. So then it becomes time that it's really important for the coach to be somehow acknowledging what they're hearing, whether that's paraphrasing, summarizing, asking some additional questions. So the coach needs to be really engaged by what they are saying.
Mm-hmm. And you can hear a smile even on the phone, can't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Anna, what would you add to that, please?
It's really, again, the way of being, what they say and how they, how they say. And it's, again, being engaged and present is, you can tell how someone is reacting, or even sometimes the way they breathe. So it's really being present to the other person, and how what they say, the little things that can really give you an idea of,
and of course,
just being present to them.
And of course, if you can see that person, then just leaning slightly forward shows that you're interested, rather than somebody who's leaning back, is fidgeting, and as Monique said, not looking or is distracted by their phone or whatever. But leaning forward and giving your focus shows that you're actively listening. I wonder how, as increasingly, not just coaches, but businesses across the world are taking their practice onto online and using Zoom. I wonder how that's going to improve people's listening skills, because you can't be seen to be too distracted or doing multitasking type things, because we can see each other. Yeah, I mean, we know that home working has increased productivity during this lockdown period. Be interesting to see what Zoom does in terms of improving relationships and listening skills. Interesting thought.
Yes, so there may be a blessing in disguise here with everything that the world is going through right now.
Mm.
Okay, well, as always, very enjoyable and enlightening discussion, Monique. Thank you. And thank you for joining us, Anna. I hope we'll see both of you again in future sessions. Our next topic in this CPD series is one of my favorites. It's powerful questions. So we're going to get rid of all the cookie cutter coaching questions and get rid of the props. And we're going to, by listening intuitively, work out what is a really powerful question to move your client forward. So I look forward to meeting you all again on that next call next month. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.